Green Lantern is a 2011 movie adaptation of the DC Comics property of the same name. And in this video, I will be reviewing the story, themes, and characters of 2011's Green Lantern. A Green Lantern project was in the works since the early 2000s. Names that were attached at one point or another were Kevin Smith, Quentin Tarantino, Jack Black, and David S. Goyer. But the only pitch to gain any traction was from writer and actor Corey Reynolds. In around 2007, Reynolds pitched Warner Bros. A Green Lantern trilogy. The trilogy would focus on the Green Lantern John Stewart, who Reynolds would star as, with plans to introduce Hal Jordan and the Justice League in the subsequent sequels. As someone who grew up with the Justice League cartoons, John Stewart was my Green Lantern. Thank you, Duffy. So I would have enjoyed seeing John Stewart's story get adapted to live action. Warner Bros. Would, however, drop the pitch to focus on a Hal Jordan Green Lantern project. There has since been 2 times after this that Warner Bros. Have prevented the live-action adaptation of John Stewart. In 2008, the Green Lantern writing team had completed 2 rough drafts of the script. A final draft wouldn't be completed until partway into filming the actual movie. Greg Berlanti was set to direct but was fired in 2009 before pre-production. Campbell would then step in to fill the role as director. He's best known for his phenomenal Bond films, GoldenEye and Casino Royale, and the entertaining Antonio Banderas-led Zorro films, The Mask of Zorro and The Legend of Zorro. These films showed how Campbell was able to portray a playful character in serious situations, especially ones who have history. Campbell has since come out to voice the reasons he feels the movie was a failure. He had no interest in the source material of Green Lantern or any comic book property. He took the job out of interest in exploring the genre. In an interview with Collider in 2021, the point about Green Lantern is that whereas with Bond, I love Bond. I love the Bond films. I really enjoyed them, but it was an event for me. I'm not a comic book fan, and the truth is I never should have done the film, but I did it because I had never done comic book film before. I respect his decision to try his hand at the genre. The Mask of Zorro is an excellent movie that parallels the common themes of comic book character Batman. Campbell was not experienced or comfortable with a project that had such heavy CGI, so I feel he would have been better suited for a character that was more grounded. But unfortunately, we'll never get to see that because he's expressed no interest in ever returning to the genre. I respect that he was able to admit his own faults, like not being familiar or interested in the source material. I agree that as an artist, if you're not passionate about the project, then maybe it is best to just step away. He was passionate about Bond, and he made arguably the best Brosnan and Craig Bond films. The fault, however, does not lie on him. Lead actor Ryan Reynolds has come out to cite how crucial a script is to a superhero movie. In an interview with Desde Hollywood in 2016, I know Green Lantern didn't work because we didn't have a script. Studios will greenlight these movies when they have a poster, an actor, and a release date. And they're starting to learn that that doesn't always work, and that was no exception. The script does no one any favors, and of course, it's the studio's fault. Warner Bros. Were constantly trying to minimize the budget, which negatively affected the script. Campbell from the same Collider interview. The problem was, I remember in the last 6 to 8 weeks of pre-production, every day, and I mean every day, we had meetings about cutting the budget. The movie was made for $200 million, with $9 million later added in post-production for the VFX. With their meddling with the script, the studio managed to make a Green Lantern movie feel isolated, generic, and bland. Iron Man was made for $140 million. It goes to show that passion and healthy creative freedom go a long way. For the lead role of Hal Jordan, there were a few names tossed around, mainly cishet white men with abs. Campbell had originally wanted Bradley Cooper for the role. I am curious to have seen Cooper as Hal Jordan, maybe in a better movie though. He's commonly played a sexually liberated womanizer in his comedic roles, though his more serious performances have allowed him to portray more human characters, which I think could have really added to Hal. The studio would ignore Campbell's suggestion and hire Reynolds. The studio and Campbell reportedly had many disagreements, especially in post-production when the studio made editing decisions that he wasn't happy with. Reynolds as Hal Jordan is Van Wilder. Reynolds has been playing Van Wilder since 2002. I think if this was a James Gunn action comedy superhero movie, then Reynolds would have really been able to shine. I'm glad that he's now able to portray a character he's more comfortable with in Deadpool, which is just Van Wilder with superpowers. The CGI. I'm no expert. The CGI doesn't look terrible to me. It matches with the time, and the VFX team was reportedly rushed in post-production, with that $9 million only given to them 2 months before the release. They did their best, and I respect their interpretations of the source material. The way they were rushed and the kind of budget they were given definitely took its toll on the designs, however. I'm honestly fine with the design of the suit. It's nothing really special. It's pretty basic, to be honest. I do feel like it didn't need to be entirely CGI. I think a practical suit with CGI effects would have worked better. The designs for the extraterrestrial elements of the movie weren't very interesting. The only designs that I liked were Sinestro and Hector Hammond, both in-person actors under practical prosthetics. Parallax as a giant space cloud of fear could have been an interesting concept. The victim looks into the cloud, and it generates the biggest fears, forming constructs of their own, playing with the core element of the Green Lantern lore, imagination. The story of the movie is basic. A classic hero's journey with a shallow theme that is poorly conveyed. The movie opens up with unnecessary exposition that is later re-explained in a more structurally justified way when the audience is learning along with the characters. The movie opens up with the main antagonist, Parallax, a former guardian that is now corrupted by the power of fear. We see, but mostly hear, the level of threat that he presents, feeding off the fear of his victims and apparently destroying 2 planets off-screen. Although he is a mighty opponent, he lacks any personality. His only motive is revenge against those who imprisoned him. They instead use the secondary antagonists, I'll talk about later, to show how fear corrupts, leaving Parallax to be a bit shallow. They keep the consistency of the corruption of fear. Parallax is representing how fear can corrupt a person, something shared with the secondary antagonist as well, and something that Hal Jordan tries to fight against. I think that the characterization of Avenger could have been stronger. He isn't given much screen time, and what he is given isn't properly utilized. He appears, then he dies, then the corpse praises him as this legendary honorable Green Lantern. There are many moments when the audience is told and not shown, which is poor writing again. After mortally wounding Avenger, Parallax follows him to Earth, where Avenger's ring goes to find the new Green Lantern of Sector 2814. The establishment of Hal Jordan is this generic, cool guy who doesn't care about anything because he's the best at everything introduction that was very common back in the day. As I said before, he's Van Wilder. Reynolds tries to use this to add life to the character, but the movie has a lack of commitment to how they want to portray Hal, so he moves along the movie with no real change. He's reckless, but isn't really punished for his actions. When he is, it's not severe, or it's reversed almost immediately. There are moments when people close to Hal try to confront him, but it's never given any weight. Hal either changes the subject or the conversation just kind of fizzles out. His love interest is Cara Ferris. Blake Lively plays her pretty well. A bit like a ripoff of Pepper Potts, but this whole movie feels like a ripoff of Iron Man. They try to establish Cara and Hal as polar opposites. Cara has evolved into a mature adult, while Hal remains an irresponsible maverick. They never really give her a moment to really dig into Hal. She's always giving him a second chance. I assume this is supposed to show that Hal has potential, and she's the only one that can really see it, so she's the only one that can really bring that out of him. The only character to really get at Hal is Sinestro, a former colleague of Ab and Sur. Martin Strong plays him pretty good, almost Shakespearean, but I think that's just me projecting because he's British. Sinestro chips away at Hal's confidence, feeling that Hal isn't worthy to row the ring of Green Lantern. The adaptation of the character is pretty solid. The comic book version does have more to him that I don't feel was fully explored in this movie, but perhaps they were saving it for the sequel. The inclusion of Hal's family is very unnecessary. His father's death and messaging only kind of muddles up the theme of the movie, which I believe is vulnerability. Hal has a fear of failure. This makes him unable to commit to some things like a relationship with Carol or being a member of the Green Lantern Corps. They try to draw a parallel between Hal having to live up to the legacies of Ab Sur and his own father, though Ab Sur's legacy is given more weight to it, with Hal's father's legacy only being a good pilot, which Hal already is. The messaging from the dad is to find a way to conquer your fears, like how he wasn't afraid to die, I guess. It's not well written or executed, so it's hard for me to salvage any meaningful messaging from it. The problem with Hal being afraid of failure is that he never really fails, or faces any serious consequences from these failures. When he quits Ferris Air, Kara hires him back. When he leaves the Green Lantern Corps, he walks right back in. There are only two moments when Hal really faces any consequences from his actions. One is when Hal tells Kara that he's quit the Corps. Seeing how he's just wasted an opportunity, Carol voices her disappointment in Hal, seeing him again quit and not living up to his full potential. But she doesn't go beyond that. I think that if she decided to give up on Hal, then that would have really added to the character. Hal finally loses Carol to his fear of failure. We see the manifestation of what happens when you allow fear to take over in the secondary antagonist, Hector Hammond. And this is done in a far more interesting way than it is with Parallax. Peter Sarsgaard has fun with the role, and it's very entertaining to watch. He isn't given much time to develop, but they've at least focused on the key elements that they've given the character. Hammond has lived as a failure in his father's eyes, working as a loser professor at a college. One night he's called into this Area 51-like government facility to study the recovered corpse of Ab Sur. He's infected with the power of fear and slowly mutates into this monstrous version of himself. His father is the senator. I like how the relationship of father and son is portrayed between the two. It's the little things that really made it believable. You can tell what kind of relationship they have by their performance. Hector is reserved, self-conscious, and the senator clearly wanted a son like Hal, but he's working with what he's got. They even make Hector a more sympathetic character than Hal. Hal is perfect while Hector is human. The moment he's given power, he's corrupted by it. He's lived in failure his entire life, so he no longer fears disappointment. He's an actual threat with motives driven by jealousy and liberation. I like when a villain draws visible parallels between them and the hero.
How did we end up so different? Sit down! I'm scared.
Please.
No.
Look how I feel bad for you, really.
You're just as much of a failure as I was. But just as afraid. Well, I used to fight my fear.
Hal and Hector have both lived in fear of failing to live up to the world's expectations of them. Hector finally gives in to his fears, while Hal conquers his fears by accepting them. He is vulnerable, he is human. He will play to his own strengths as a Green Lantern, finally committing to something and not being afraid of failing. They try to have Hal have a "someone died and it's my fault" moment, but it falls flat. I believe this is due to the poor pacing of the movie. Hector killed his own father in front of Hal, but the Senator wasn't an interesting or emotionally relevant character. Hal had already quit the Corps, but was still performing as a superhero. So it's not like he's not living up to his responsibility. It's even after Hal saved Carol that she voices her disappointments. And even after that, Hal still goes to try to save the Senator. After he fails, Carol just talks to him again and he gets over it. Hal has just faced a serious consequence for his failure, but he barely sits in it because the movie is almost over. Campbell had originally wanted the other future Green Lanterns, Kilowog, Tomare, and Sinestro, to fight alongside Hal at the final battle against Parallax. I think it would have fit perfectly, but that was cut because of the budget. Sinestro had been preaching about unity and rallying together the Green Lantern Corps the entire movie. Plus, he had just gained new respect for Hal. It would also make sense because Parallax had defeated several Green Lanterns before, so just one Green Lantern would not make logistical sense. Unless Hal was the best Green Lantern ever, which he is according to this movie. There are certain elements of the Green Lantern lore that I find interesting that weren't fully utilized in this movie. The lack of clear vision, effort, and passion does make this movie feel like it was generated. I hope in the future we get a proper live-action adaptation of Green Lantern, hopefully with either Jon Stewart or Kyle Rayner. And God help us if they decide to make a Guy Gardner movie.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!